Welcome to the Healing My Parts podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and raising awareness about dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. We are your hosts, the system behind Healing My Parts, which also includes parts that function as a therapist and leader in a mental health niche space. We'll be sharing tips and tools that have helped us and many others, while also sharing insights from our own journey of living with the condition. We'll also be hosting guests for conversations to help educate, dispel myths, and most especially help those living with dissociative identities and professionals who treat the condition. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now, let's get healing. Welcome, everyone. We are really looking forward to today's conversation, which is focused on other specified dissociative disorder 1A and 1b, or OSDD1a and 1b. They are very similar to DID, with many of the experiences and healing journeys being similar. And there are, in fact, more people who live with OSDD than with DID. This episode today actually came to be by one of today's guests reaching out and saying, "Hey, I know your podcast is focused on DID, but I have OSDD. And at first, I didn't think that your podcast was going to be relevant to me, but I listened to it and actually found it to be really relevant and really helpful." That then gave us the idea of, wouldn't it be great to have an OSDD1A and OSDD1b system as guests for the podcast? So without further ado, I am going to ask both systems to introduce themselves to you while we simultaneously welcome them to the podcast today. So welcome, and would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves to folks?
Hi, my name is Pippin. I'm the OSDD1b system.
And I'm going to go by A, and I'm the OSDD1a system.
So I know everyone will be really curious about both how and when you discovered that you are a system.
It's kind of really odd, and it's kind of something that I've struggled with a little bit because I've told multiple therapists, multiple psychologists, multiple people like this story, and I've gotten mixed reactions from both providers, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know about that," and the other were like, "Oh yeah, no, that's valid." I actually noticed early middle school that there was definitely something off. I definitely had moments of heavy dissociation, kind of almost feeling like, what I was doing wasn't me. And then I started hearing voices. And at that age, I was like, oh, imaginary friends, I just have an overactive imagination. And that's what I had been told by family members and like other doctors, like, oh, you're just having overactive imagination. As I got older, I noticed that, I was like, maybe this is just my conscious. Maybe this is just me narrating things. It's just a normal, everyday thing. And then I noticed that voice had a name. I was hesitant on calling by name, and because I didn't really understand what was going on. And I was kind of worried that, with the confusion, was I going to affirm something and give in to the overactive imagination, or was this something else? But everybody I turned to always just hit me with, oh, imagination. And I was like, okay, well, there's no validation anywhere, so maybe you're right. And then as I got to high school, I remember talking to my friends, and I was like, do you notice that I act differently? Are there moments when you're having a conversation and you feel like suddenly you're talking to somebody else? And some of my friends were like, yeah, I've noticed that a few different times. And other people were like, no, I don't notice a difference. I asked my family members, and they barely paid attention to me in the first place. So they didn't really like, no, I don't really notice anything. And so I realized what it was, but I didn't know what it was called. It wasn't until 2022 that I went to a psychologist, and I was like, no, like, I swear, like, this is what's going on. Did a deep dive into past the symptoms and things I noticed and this and that. And she was like, okay, DID. And then we came back later and she said, no, it's OSDD. And I was like, okay, now we have that figured out. So for once, it took 20 something years to get that validation, but I'm glad I finally got it.
We're glad you got it too. It sounds like quite a journey to get there. And especially with such knowledge, self-knowledge from a really young age.
Yes, it was definitely a lot of research And I was kind of worried that I was like, maybe I'm doing too much research and I'm convincing myself and it's not actually happening. And then it took my therapist going, no, you are valid. Your experiences are there. It's denial is a very, very common thing among systems. You're good.
What was it like for you, A?
So I just got diagnosed in January. Prior to getting diagnosed, had been in therapy for about 20 years and am myself a mental health provider. And like it completely, I did not see it coming at all. So that was very humbling to feel like, oh, I'm kind of an expert in, or supposed to be an expert, whatever that means, in this field. And I had no idea that this is what I was dealing with. I knew that I dissociated, and I had been called dissociative by therapists that I'd had in the past. And I had learned about MPD in college. And I remember when I was learning about it, which was actually in a like American Studies class, it wasn't a psychology class, being like, wow, this is really interesting. Like there's something about this that's staying with me and that I find compelling. But in no way was I like, oh, that sounds like me, or yes, that resonates. Personally, all along, I've been struggling in therapy and feeling like I'm not able to engage for various reasons. And that's been framed as things like resistance or, you know, interpersonal attachment stuff. And so I think the understanding that I'd had was just that there was something wrong with me, and that I wasn't able to use therapy effectively. And that was my fault at some level. So getting this diagnosis has been really kind of mind blowing because it's really changed all of that frame. Like, of course, attachment is part of what's happening, but it's not that I'm resistant or I'm not trying or it's not a good fit. It's that I'm dissociative and the parts of me have different feelings about what's happening in therapy and are letting me know. There's still a lot I don't know about what it means to have OSDD and to be in parts and to be a system because it's pretty new. But I do feel like one thing I really want to say to people who are listening is like, be humble, I guess. Like, I think we know what this is as providers or as the people living it, but still it can be really shocking or like a really big shift in a framing to bring this understanding to somebody's experience, to the therapist's experience and to the client's experience.
Really good points. We were thinking while you were talking that the descriptions of whether it's OSDD, DID, any dissociative disorder in like the DSM really doesn't feel reflective of the actual experience of the person going through it. Sometimes like it's really difficult to read the criteria and say, oh yeah, that's me. Once you see it all, then it's a little easier to go, oh yeah, that is me. But there is also this lack of, I guess, information out there about how surreal and unstabilizing it can be to get that information in the very beginning. Like it's being hit with a lot. Out of curiosity, how do you each experience your parts or your system mates? And along with that question, do you refer to them as parts or system mates, head mates? What's your preferred language?
I kind of go through like a roulette of names, anything from headmates to besties upstairs. So it's kind of our friends upstairs. It's kind of like I think the most common one I use is the friends upstairs. I don't know really how to explain like how I experience them. Like I think one thing I will say that caused as another thing that causes a lot of denial and doubt spirals is I know some systems, probably the majority of systems, what I've always been told by either other systems or doctors is it takes years and years of therapy and working before you're able to have a conversation with your headmates. And for me, that's just not my lived experience. I experience them maybe 60% of the time, 70% clear and concise. You know, they are aware of each other. have like strong amnesic barriers between them where they're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who you are. In the very beginning of like realizing, there was definitely I don't know who I am. I don't know. And even then, sometimes I still have moments when I start dissociating and all of a sudden too many people are near the front, or somebody just pops in randomly and I'm like, I don't know who I am right now. I don't know what's going on. So it's not a clear picture in my head. I can assess essentially what we call the fronting room looks like. Like we state it's like right outside the inner world. Like there's a door in the back of the room that leads into the inner world. Essentially, it's mostly just clear and concise, and sometimes it's blended. The emotions are blended. Memories get blended out of nowhere, and so it's a lot of times like walking into a room with full on conversations everywhere. And then other times it's extremely quiet. There are times when I'm like, oh, did everybody go dormant? What happened? Everyone's really, really quiet. And then it's, oh no, we're here. And then it's chatter from two or three other people. So it just really varies day to day. But for the most part, it's clear and concise for me. And that kind of scares me a little because I know for a lot of people that's not the case.
I feel like you described that really, really well.
Okay, good. I was hoping I wasn't rambling.
No, not at all. I also love your friends upstairs. It's really sweet. What's it like for you, A?
I wish I felt that way about my system, my friends upstairs. That sounds really like my homies hanging out. Yeah, so like what is happening? Not totally clear. Sometimes there are vision changes where things get kind of wavy or blurry, and then I'm like, okay, there's a shift happening. Sometimes there are emotion states, but it's like a personified emotion state, kind of like it's not a feeling where it's like, oh, this is DBT, like let the wave go by. It's not like that. It's like solid, kind of a solid emotion state, like a frown personified, for example. So then I know, okay, there's been a shift of some kind, or like a part a part has shifted. And then sometimes it's almost like an emotional flashback, or like a felt experience or a felt memory, but it's happening now and it's personified again. It's not, you know, when I think of a memory, I think of like a sequence of events from the past that are getting played out now. And so like a flashback is like maybe more intense, but that's different than like a self from another time, or like an embodiment of an age from another time. Those things feel different to me. So there's a lot of variety, and sometimes the shifts are really clear, and sometimes they're less clear. Sometimes it's clear why a shift is happening, and sometimes not. So in my experience, there's quite a lot of variability, and that's part of what makes it confusing and maybe hard to identify. I do call the parts of the system parts, and that's because it was introduced to me that way. I'm still trying to figure out if that feels right or not, but for now, that's the word I use.
Oh, that makes sense. You described that really well. I wanted to ask if, when you were talking about experiencing like a frown personified or an emotional flashback or memory type thing, does it ever feel like you're feeling somebody else's emotions? Just curious.
No, it's a really good question. I mean, I would say most of the time I don't feel very much. So when feelings come in, they do often feel like separate or ego dystonic or unfamiliar in a way that like maybe they could belong to someone else. But I also think, so much of my dissociative experience has to do with numbing. So anytime an emotion is there, it's noticeable, that exists at all.
Makes so much sense when you think about the purpose of dissociation in general, right? It's to move you away from the things that are overwhelming or difficult, a lot of which is emotion. So many times I feel like one of the things that we share is that sometimes muted or lack of emotional for a significant portion of the journey.
Mhm.
It seems like.
Definitely.
We didn't ask and probably should have to just have you both sort of describe your understanding of what OSDD1A and what OSDD1B is, because a lot of people don't know.
1B, if I'm understanding correctly, strictly textbook based. 1D is like, or 1B is like DID, but without the strong severe amnesia. And then 1A was a little bit like 1B, but without the strong, fully fleshed out parts. And that's kind of my understanding. It's very basic. I've done a lot more deep dive into DID and OSDDB than I have 1A. Though I have met a few other people with 1A. And I just never really got to talk much about any. There was, I think, a few I asked, and they were like, either I don't really understand it myself, or I don't feel comfortable going into it. And I said, that's perfectly fine. So I am a little fresh on the 1A aspect.
That's okay. We have A who's going to be able to speak to that. But before we do that, I wonder if you might want to define for people what a gray out is.
So for my lived experience, is gray outs is as somebody gets close to the front, I start to kind of get dissociated. And then it's like full dissociation the majority of the time. And it's almost like I'm sitting in the passenger seat of a car. I can see what's going on, but I can't react. I can't do anything. My mouth is moving, there's words coming out, I'm looking around, but I'm completely helpless in my body. I call it gray out amnesia because I'm aware, and then when I come back and I'm fully there, give it up to an hour. By the end of that hour, I've completely forgotten everything that just happened when that person was out. So it's like I come back and I'm like, okay, I kind of know what we're talking about a little bit. I can kind of keep up a conversation. And then maybe 30 minutes later, I'm like, I don't know what we just talked about. I have no clue what you were just saying. I'm sorry, I forgot. And that's why I call it gray out, because it's not complete lack of amnesia, but it's not strong amnesia. It's a little bit in the middle.
That's super helpful for people. How about you, A? How would you define OSDD 1A, 1B, your experience?
So, oh, my thinking is that OSDD1A is you have parts, but they're not quite defined enough, or like they don't have names. They're not necessarily as distinct as in DID. So it's more like this feeling or like these states. When I talk about anger personified or like a frown personified, it's like this entity or state, but it's not really a person. Like it doesn't have a name. It doesn't have its own multidimensional life. So when I think about what 1A is, I think about that it's defined by states or entities rather than like people. And I don't know if that's right. That's just sort of how I've come to understand it inside myself.
Really cool description.
And 1B, I mean, my understanding from listening to other folks is that there's that there's sort of a more of a co-consciousness than there would be in DID. So like an awareness of the different selves or alters moving in and out. But I think it varies. I also wanted to say that I was talking to some people who were running a study in Israel about DID, and I mentioned OSDD1A, and they were like, what is that? So I also think that the 1A and 1B constructs are not universal. Like I think we're all still trying to figure out, how do we talk about this? What do we mean this?
I may be completely wrong about this, but I think the OSDD1A and B may be I don't know if it's just a US based thing or not. It seems like in Europe and the UK, they tend towards partial DID versus like full DID. Sort I might be wrong because I don't obviously practice over. None of us practice over there. So that was one way that I had also thought about it. But yeah, it's really helpful, I think, for folks to hear your personal experiences as well as your understanding of the two differentiations between OSDD1A and 1B. Moving into that though a little bit, one thing that across the board everyone is universally interested in is mechanisms for internal communication and what that's like. So sometimes, some systems experience very little internal communication, while other systems experience a whole heck of a lot of internal communication and everywhere in between, including spotty communication. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. What is yours like?
So mine, it's definitely taken some practice. I know I stated earlier, like it kind of seemed like from the get-go, it was even from a young age, which her name is Delilah, and we call her like mom of the group. She is gatekeeper, and she does a heck of a good job gatekeeping. And like I heard her, and when she would respond, I thought, I'm just, responding to myself. And she mostly, a lot of times it wasn't me really responding. It was really her. She played a lot of jobs before the others made themselves known. Like, so she was gatekeeper first and foremost, but she kind of played the role of a little bit of protecting and a little bit of comforting. And then, S, we'll call him S, and appeared, and he kind of appeared with D, and they kind of are a pair. They kind of came as a pair, and then the others gradually made themselves known. Some who we realized have been around for years. There was a recent one who made herself known, extremely recent, and she had been dormant for many years. She was around when I was very little. She'd been dormant for many years, and recent trauma and high stress triggers kind of woke her up. The internal communication I feel like I kind of have to explain how like the fronting room is to kind of explain the internal communication. Like the way I kind of envision it, and the way they've kind of confirmed it for me, is like there's a room, and this part of me wants to be able to just say it, but there is a part of me that is trying to hold back, because it's part of the denial. And it's just really a big dark room with TVs everywhere, just monitors, and each person gets a seat. And there's like a long row of chairs. Each person gets a seat, and then there's a chair, and in front, what we call the fronting chair. So when someone, if you're standing a little too close to that chair, you kind of start messing with the person who is fronting. So I suddenly your emotions are really loud. Your memories can get clogged. I know there was a moment for Hanako, who was our newest, where she was like, why do I remember this? I don't think I was around for this. Why do I remember it? I'm like, I don't think it was your memory. It may have been somebody else's. And it's like I said, it's kind of clear. Like the voices is as if someone's sitting right next to me talking to me. And then there are moments when it does get blurry, and they seem very far away, like they're shouting from across the room, but I can't really, it's almost like they're whispering, even though they're like, no, I'm like right here. I promise you, I'm right near the front. But our internal communication, I don't have access to the internal world. And I think that's Delilah keeping it that way. I don't really have access to that. Jade tried explaining. She couldn't. It's almost, if there were any amnesia barriers, that is one where they may spend time in the inner world, and then they come out and they're like, I don't know what I just did. I kind of remember, I kind of don't recall what just went on for however long, and we think Delilah may also be doing that for whatever reason. She won't tell us, but the gatekeeper knows best, I guess. But that's essentially how our internal communication is. It's clear, concise. We have a room. I'm not sure if it was this podcast or a different podcast that mentioned the movie Inside Out, and we had developed this room years prior, and then the movie came out, and then anytime people would ask, we're like, oh yeah, it looks like this, and they're like, oh, like Inside Out, and I'm like, very different, but I see where you're going with this.
I feel like Inside Out is the place where we all kind of go towards when it's different parts kind of taking control over other parts rather than collaborating and working together, right? It's a good conceptualization for people who are not systems.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I like I said, I don't know if you had done an episode on it or if I was looking at another DID one that was doing an episode and I was like, you know what? That kind of makes sense. And
Yeah.
it kind of changed my view a little bit on the movie because when I first saw the movie, I was like, wow, why does that seem really familiar? And then anytime people brought it up to me, they're like, oh, it's like Inside Out. It was not in a way of them trying to understand. It was a way of them to kind of fake claim and say, oh, well, you know, you saw the movie and therefore you think you this and that. And so I think hearing that episode definitely like brought it into a better light for me.
I know we definitely did talk about it because it was one of the things that our therapist said. She's like, you know, when anger takes over or when sadness takes over and they kind of knock somebody else out of the controls and they're just in control of how Riley is moving through the world, that's kind of where you're at. And the goal is at the very end of the movie where they have this big, elaborate control panel and they're all working together and it's all coordinated. That's the goal. I was like, oh
That
shit, that makes
definitely
a lot of
does,
sense.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
What's it like for you, A?
so the most communication that happens for us is imagery, visual imagery. We'll get like very complex, very rich images that sort of get passed back and forth that are sometimes related to what's going on in the outer world and sometimes really don't seem to be. And there are some images that are recurrent and they become familiar or they come to stand for certain kinds of experiences or certain kinds of fear. And then there are others that are whimsical or kind of random. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And, you know, just let it go unless I have time to give it more attention. I do think the images have helped me in my work as a therapist because I'll have images about my clients while I'm talking to them. And that's something I can bring to the clinical work. I can say, like, okay, I see this thing. I don't usually tell them, but I in my head, I'm like, okay, I see this thing that's coming up for me as I'm talking to this client. And what does that have to offer what I'm trying to do in the work that I'm doing right now? But yeah, there's a lot of imagery. It's very frequent. And I would say that's the primary mode of communication right now.
Do you notice any others? Since you had mentioned it being primary, that begs the question of are there secondary types of communication that you experience?
Yeah, sometimes there are like certain recurrent thoughts that feel, I don't know, they're a little bit stereotyped, I guess, in this way that makes it feel they don't feel spontaneously generated, but they also don't feel intrusive the way an OCD thought would feel intrusive. They're just kind of like this stamp that gets stamped. And it's like, there's that thought again. Okay, so I think that that's communication from parts. And certainly there are very clear messages about not wanting to do certain things. Like the no is very clear some of the time. And sometimes that's the word no. Sometimes that's just a feeling like, nope, we're not gonna do that.
I love talking about different types of internal communication because I think sometimes really people think that it's only always this type of auditory verbal kind of communication when there are so many other ways that our parts communicate with us. And I love that you were talking about visual imagery and the thought stamp, you know, because there are so many people that experience those things and don't recognize it as communication. And I think too, you know, I know for our system, we experience a wide variety of different types of communication. And sometimes like somatic feeling states can be communication as well, or this like sudden urge to do something or a craving to have something. It can also be
Yeah.
communication. It's not remotely verbal. And I think if we're not paying attention to those things, sometimes we can miss some really important pieces of information from different selves.
Especially because I think as a society, we associate nonverbal, non left brain thinking or decision making or communication as childlike or like it's devalued, right? It's not logical. So there's this way that we're trained to not attend to those sorts of impulses or communications from ourselves, even if we don't have a system or we don't have parts. So there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen to figure out what to pay attention to or like what to hear, even if it's not
Really
auditory,
good
like
points.
what to
It's
hear.
funny because when you think about it, I feel like we don't often talk about each other's internal kind of worlds, whether you're a system or not. People who only recently started talking about, do you have an internal monologue? We don't talk about that stuff. And so then, therefore, I think sometimes people don't have the opportunity to really be able to reflect on what their internal experiences really is, whether it's visual or somatic, auditory, or what have you.
That we have actually started doing. We started journaling. Alex, who is a trauma holder, he tried journaling. V started journaling. Claire, being the emotional and mental protector, I have recently, in the last few months, started journaling more to help as a way of coping and calming down. And I'm like, I have such high anxiety. If I just get it all on paper, I'll feel so much better. It's not hiding in there. And so when I'm emotionally like pent up or I'm getting really like anxious, she will immediately go, nope, my turn. And will then proceed to journal it all out in a way she thinks that, she feels comfortable, but in a way that she thinks I will understand. Definitely like images, because I will definitely get that. I have a weird craving for ice cream. Why am I craving ice cream? And like it will go from a random eating macaroni and cheese to I really want ice cream. And it takes me a minute to go, oh, that's little one, who is our 7-year-old. I'm like, oh, she's wanting ice cream right now. And then sometimes she will pop up and go, hee hee, yeah, I want ice cream. And there's definitely that feeling. There's a mixture of feelings and emotions that become really, really strong. And I'm like, whoa, why didn't you just say something was wrong? And then, sometimes they can't like verbalize what's going on. That's the only way they know in that moment to communicate.
Curious, what are some ways that you see your systems as helpful or helping you in your daily life?
There's a reason why I call them besties upstairs, because they really do feel like friends, because they have been like helpful. And I know I've had conversations with therapists, and even other some system friends. We've talked about integration, and I'm like, I don't think I want to, like, I don't think that's my goal, is to eventually integrate. One, that can be painful for some. Two, that takes many, many years. And it's something that this, I don't think is needed per se, in order for me to like live my life. And everybody who does their job, they take it very seriously. Like S is the main protector. He does that job very, very well, and he takes it very seriously, and he's very helpful. Especially when the denial kicks in, he is quick to nab it and go, nope, we're not doing that. We're not going down that road. I'm literally right here. Don't deny me. And Delilah, is quick to mother. She's quick to, when I'm like, why do I get this feeling, and nab it? Nope, not right now. Lulu is very quick when it comes to comforting. Lulu and D take turns, when something's going on, very stressful, very sad. And Claire, now another recent joining to the group, being the emotional and mental protector, she kind of helped and was like a third leg to the comforting, because if it's mentally emotional related, she kind of steps in instead. And so everybody kind of has a role, and they play it well, and they've been really helpful, and if anything, it's great, but again, also sometimes causes me denial, because as I was talking to my therapist a few weeks ago, I just sitting in my car on my break at work, and I just had this epiphany. I was like, why is it that every system I've talked to, every doctor I've talked to, they always say this is such a debilitating disorder, and yet for me, from my lived experience, I don't feel like it is for me. Like, I feel like it's helping me with a lot of things. And maybe that's just because I have such good communication with them, and we're able to work alongside together so well, that it is helping, and helping me heal and helping me keep on track with like goals and things. And then it dawned on me, Delilah is just a really good gatekeeper because she's, you know, I'm like, well, why is she keeps people in line? When people are like, I really want to do this, I need to do this right now. And she's like, no, you're not allowed in the front. Front's blocked. No. Um, or when people are in the front and they need to be, and they're like, I don't want to be here. She's like, I no, you need to be here right now. Only you can do this. Um, and she's just really good with keeping those memories, the memories that I can't handle, or she feels are not ready. She keeps those back. She keeps track of the inner world. Like, she just does her job so well to keep everything running, that I think that's why it feels not easy, because it's still very difficult, um, but not as disabling for me in my day-to-day life.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, there are many people now that are talking about the concept of dissociative identities versus dissociative identity disorder, whether that's OSDD or, DID itself, that when you have parts that are able to collaborate and work together, and it sounds like your system is very organized, it would make sense that you're able to accomplish quite a bit together. What are your thoughts, A, about how your system maybe is helpful in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, it's a complicated question at this particular moment in time. I mean, certainly it's protective. It's protective in lots of different ways. And it's very clear that that's its origin story, is to be protective. And it knows how to do that. And sometimes that has a very high cost. And so, there's this ongoing conversation now about what are the things that can shift and what are the things that need to stay. And there is an agreement about those questions, the answers to those questions. So that can mean a lot of conflict inside. And I think that's the part that's really hard about OSDD for me, is the inner conflict. But, I completely honor and am grateful for the imagery. Like, it's very powerful, it's very beautiful, brings a lot of meaning to my life. It wouldn't be there without the system. And I'm grateful to know that there are realities outside of me, like that, as entrenched as my way of thinking might be, it's not the only one. And I get to experience that in real time. That's humbling, keeps me really humble, I guess. Which is not always what I want to be feeling, but
From our
is
perspective, it's so
growth.
interesting having the opportunity to hear from so many different systems, how different everybody's experiences are. And I think it's a really beautiful thing to be able to bring perspectives like these out to people. So hearing how each of you answered that question so differently was really neat. I'm curious, and I know other people will be curious, because I think compensation is a huge part of getting through day-to-day life as a system, like how you compensate for things that maybe are not running so smoothly. Because I think even in the best, most well-oiled system machines, parts can still sometimes go rogue. Things can still sort of happen. There's always the hashtag OSDD or DID life that comes up from time to time when you have one of those system moments. You're like, oh, damn. And I'm curious your thoughts about, and some of this is just literal curiosity because we do a lot of compensating for many things. If anybody ever takes our phone, I'm screwed. It's things like alarms, reminders are key. But I'm curious about how you each as systems have needed to compensate or maybe do still compensate for being a system in a world that seems to be primarily still singlets.
Definitely there are moments. Like, for example, like there is one coworker who knows. And so like around her we don't really have to compensate. Whereas, the rest of, coworkers don't know. And so for like Jade is the like she has a very thick southern accent. Very thick. And so Delilah kind of keeps her at bay, and she kind of knows like when at work I cannot be active and front. Because at home, I live with my grandparents because I help take care of my grandpa, and they are aware of them to the point where my grandma will, and bless her, I love her for this. She will look at me and go, "Who am I talking to?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's so and so, it's whoever." Or sometimes she'll like, "Hey, I have a list of things I need you to do tomorrow. Let Pip know, or whoever's here. Someone keep track. Someone do something." And so it's more compensating at work than anything for specific people.
I think it's really beautiful that your grandparents are open and accepting and recognizing when you have different selves forward. Are there things that you have found, A, that help you all kind of navigate life a little easier in terms of just compensating for being a system that I know you're still getting to know, but
So we are not out with anyone except one friend, and we are married and we're a parent of young kids. So we do a lot of compensating. Doesn't always feel like we're doing a great job, but nobody has been like, hey, you think you might have DID? So I guess it's working to some extent.
it must be.
So how do we do that? Well, there are certain aspects of our life that are really, really important to us to get right. The parenting is one. So, like, we are absolutely not going to fuck up our parenting. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast. I didn't ask you that. So
I was going to ask the same thing.
You totally can. Have at it.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, like giving my kids a different childhood than the childhood I had, number one priority. So, even though parenting is super difficult in a lot of ways, that's the place where I show up with the most, I don't know, like congruence or intentionality. And when those things are there, it's much easier to navigate. Even if parts do go rogue or kind of show up in different ways, there's like a shared belief in the importance of that role. And so everybody's on board and nobody's going to do anything to harm that mission so far. Work, again, like clients are super important to me. Certainly stuff that comes up in the work brings up reactions from parts, but we've been doing this a long time now. I feel like the system has kind of figured out how to hold stuff and still let me know if there's something that needs addressing that I can deal with later. Social situations are really difficult for the system. That's the place where I forget what word you used in terms of like passing, but like where passing gets really tricky. And so, at this point we're biologically adults, so we don't have to put ourselves in situations that we don't want to be in, and we just don't. Like, we don't care for big groups of people, we don't go to parties, we don't put ourselves in situations where we don't feel we can be okay. And when we were growing up and those sorts of settings were a lot more developmentally necessary, we just kind of like held our breath and got through it, but it was hard. So in that sense, being an adult is helpful for sort of getting along with parts, but that's just because I don't really care if people think I'm a recluse, or it doesn't matter to me. I do wonder if this career choice is one that many folks with dissociative experiences make, because it is very, it really limits how many people you're going to interact with. Like, you interact with one person at a time, and it's kind of the serial interactions, and there's a lot of parameters, and all of that is very helpful for this system anyway. So there's that. And then, there are moments where we don't have a lot of control over what the system does. And that's really hard. But, so far, it hasn't been so severe that it's caused harm to anyone. We're grateful for that. We know that's not true for everybody. So it's a little bit scary, but I think my hope is that the more I listen or the more I create space for the reality of the system, the less that will happen.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be really challenging to have trust in a system when really, especially when really good communication is not there. Sometimes I like to think things like, well, it's gotten us this far. Probably it will get us the rest of the way. And yet at the same time, I think especially when you know all of the potential things that can go wrong, and maybe some of that is being a provider and witnessing things going wrong for other people where you can go, oh, but there is potential for things to really head south. And that feels super scary and can make it challenging to trust the system. And yet the system keeps showing up day in and day out and doing what it does and getting us through, which is a good thing. What are your thoughts on stigma when it comes to OSDD, dissociation in general, CPTSD, since, generally you'll have that if you have OSDD and DID?
I really have strong feelings about stigma because and this, I hope it doesn't like not devalue but kind of like knock off or invalidate me. I do see a lot of stigma and misinformation and fake claiming, and this is why this isn't real, and this isn't that. And I see a lot of it, you know mainly around the percentages. DID isn't as common as everyone's making out to be, and it's only like 1.1 of the world, and people aren't understanding that it is not as uncommon as people may think, because it is a covert disorder. Of course you're not going to know, because it was designed for the person, for the brain. It's like the brain designed it for you to not know. And so I think that's like my biggest grievance is when I'm talking to people and they throw, you're not a system. It's not as common as you think it is. It's too rare. And I've had doctors throw that at me. I've had friends who are no longer friends throw that at me. I've had strangers on the internet throw it at me, because their whole thing, I mean, you had everything in the 90s and everyone's like, no, I don't want to diagnose it, this and that. And then the time of internet came around, and then it was just so easy to pass around information that people were like, oh, well, I this isn't that. And then people are like, no, you just looked online and saw something and then you just assume you have it now. And so it's really hard to kind of teach people and to even be out with people you think you can trust, because the stigma is so bad, and it's almost always it's uncommon.
Yeah, I think that media is one of the worst offenders for promulgating myths about systems. What are your thoughts, eh?
So I when you ask the question about stigma, where my mind goes is how incredibly difficult it's been to find a provider who will work with me. And even though I'm in the field and even though I know how to say the right things, that's been a source of real heartbreak. That I'll work with a therapist, and either they don't see it because like my sort of high functioning appearance doesn't line up with the stigmatized narrative around what it is, like how many people over how many years didn't see. And then, now that I do know, I've had the experience of my provider telling me I can't work with you anymore because I'm not an expert in this. And then like searching for someone who would work with me, and that being a very difficult process. So I think there's a lot of stigma in our field about this diagnosis. And, that's really sad. Like, I think we have a long history of having stigma around diagnoses. So this is not the only one, but there, in many ways, I think at least our field has come to be like, oh, okay, so being queer isn't a mental illness. Like, who knew?
Oh my God. Holy
So
shit.
now, this is like maybe one of the last bastions of like, all right, so you know, when are we gonna this and borderline personality disorder stuff? Um, And so much of that is tied up, I think, in questions around liability and the fact that we don't, we're taught that you need a certain kind of training to work with these conditions. And if you don't have it, then you can be liable and you shouldn't do it. Or like there's just all sorts of stuff for providers that make it difficult to get over that stigma, I think. So it's going to take work at the level of how clinicians are trained and how what their what their practicums look like, and there's a lot of work in our field to be done around this question, I think. And I've noticed that even people who do treat it and like feel really good about treating it don't advertise, as they don't say like, hey, I treat DID, come and find me, so what's that about? Because then that we could be normalizing that this is something that we treat, and we don't do that, and why is that? So I think we have a lot of accounting to do with ourselves as a field around this question, separate from popular media and all that really problematic stuff. But media doesn't understand therapy anyway, really, except for couples therapy. Shout out to couples therapy, but except for that.
So true. I'm just thinking we could do like an entire episode on this topic alone, right? Between being in school and having professors say, oh, dissociative disorders, unless it's, DPDR. Other than that, DID, OSDD, don't worry about it. You'll never see it. Meanwhile, right, we're all learning about the various different types of psychosis that somebody can have presenting through schizophrenia or brief psychotic disorder, et cetera. And yet, schizophrenia, depending on the study that you look at, is between points, I think it's like 0.36 to 0.70. And there are more people with DID than there are with people who have schizophrenia. And yet nobody's questioning the existence of people with schizophrenia like they do people with DID and OSDD. Nobody's seems to be confused as to how to treat somebody with schizophrenia, yet we're confused about how to treat people with OSDD and DID. And I find it really interesting that, so many people with DID and OSDD are folks with sexual abuse and horrific just abuse histories as children. Nobody really wants to ever talk about that. So there's so many different things. And yet you're so right, because I remember even looking for the current therapist that I work with, my intro on the voicemail was, this is who I am, blah, blah, blah. And I have DID, but before you go running, screaming out the door, I'm not really that difficult of a client. So like, just the fact that you have to say that, when if I was calling because I had generalized anxiety disorder or straight PTSD, I wouldn't be saying those things. But I absolutely felt the need to preface who I would be or who I am as a client because of a label. Oh, and by the way, please don't write that down on anything. Like, and that's all stigma based, because if you have PTSD, most people are not like, oh, don't put that on my record.
Definitely. And when I got my diagnosis, I think the stigma definitely interfered with that, because I went to my psychologist, and while I was still at the time looking for my therapist, and I was like, hey, I have this, I'm sure about it. I please, tell me what you think, walk through with me, actually hear me out. And she just, nope, you have bipolar 1. It's just psychosis. I'm like, no, trust me, it's not psychosis. And I went back and forth for sessions and sessions and sessions. And it's just psychosis. Let me up your medication. Let's change medication. It's just like, and I'm like, you are not going to medicate them away. I had to go above her to the MD of that practice just for her to go, tell me about what you remember of your childhood. And me telling her what I remember and having to relive those memories again for the upteenth time, and her go, yeah, that checks out. That sounds about right. And I'm like, why was it, difficult, but yet so easy for you to listen to me, yet nobody else? Because as soon as people heard bipolar, they went, psychosis. It's just psychosis. And I'm like, I guys, it's not psycho. It's so much more in depth. I wish you were in my brain so you knew it's not psychosis. And I think that may be something that other systems may have gone through before with who have bipolar, who have been told, it's just psychosis, or have been dismissed. I know some systems who I'm friends with actually got misdiagnosed with bipolar, thinking what you're experiencing is psychosis, and it was actually DID.
Yeah, and switching can, depending on the part that's forward, can look like mania. Switching can look like depression. Just the erratic presentation in general can lead to all sorts of different diagnoses. And a lot of clinicians don't really know the signs to look for DID and OSDD. To your point when you were talking about it being covert,
Yeah.
it doesn't announce itself when it walks through the door and sits down.
With the switching, my friend, who is a system there, they were telling me that they're in there, I think they're 35 or 36. They were telling me that when they were younger, because they got diagnosed years and years ago, that their doctor was like, I actually have to see you switch. I need to see 2 accounts where you switch. I need to know your extensive childhood history. Like they had to jump through so many hoops back then, like early mid 2000s, and it was 90s, early 2000s, if I'm doing the math correctly. And they had to jump through those hoops in order to just get that diagnosis.
Yeah, so many providers not realizing that sometimes the same part will present time and time again to sessions, and you may not actually see a switch. Thankfully, we've evolved a little bit from there, but we still have a long way to go. I know, Pippin, especially you had wanted to talk about doubt spirals.
Yes. So and especially in the last few months, it has never been as bad before as it has for some reason in the last few months. And I think it's just the self-awareness has gotten better yet worse at the same time. And I just have moments when I'm especially driving home, because I tend to dissociate really heavily when driving, because I also have maladaptive daydreaming disorder. And that causes a big denial, because I'm thinking that these are just people made up, as a part of like an extensive, in-depth daydream. And I've had them tell me, no, 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 we are real, they are real, you are fine. This is separate. And it's not until you really experience it that you realize that if there's anything debilitating that about this, it's denial, because you sit there and you ruminate and you rack your brain and you go through anxiety and you overthink. Am I making this up? Am I fake? And then it kind of brings shame, because you're thinking, this is just such a horrible thing. Not only am I making this up, does that mean I made up my past? Does that mean my childhood wasn't as bad? Was my trauma even bad enough to have this? Because then you have some people telling you, oh, from what I remember, your trauma wasn't as bad. Or if you can only remember parts of your trauma, then they assume you have less trauma. And it's, no, I have tons, but I just can't remember the majority of it. Which then should then tell you, oh, I actually maybe do have DID, because I can't really remember a lot of it. And so my heart goes out to every system out there who goes through such heavy denial, especially if it's as heavy as mine, because it literally takes away it makes me dissociate. And because I just sat there and went down this deep, dark hole of, I'm a liar, I'm manipulative, I'm lying to everybody, I'm lying to myself, I've convinced myself of this whole thing, it's a daydream, or stuff like that. And just the brain trying to convince you that it's not real as a way of protecting itself. And really it's hurting. It's like subconsciously protecting but consciously hurting. And it's something I've dealt with since the very beginning, and for some reason, I'm not sure why, it has just gotten worse recently. And I think it's because there's been arrival of new alters, and that we could have a whole episode on doubt spirals, and just how my brain works, when it comes to that. But just know that if you're in denial, one, you're not alone. It's very, very common for a system to deny because it's the brain's literal makeup to tell you this is not happening as a way of protecting you. And so if you're going through denial and you're doubting yourself every morning, and just think of the small things, the small differences that you notice, and kind of hold on to those. If you have clear and concise conversations and you have those links to the inside, hold on to those, because those are your reality. That is your reality, and someone else's reality is not your reality. So when someone tries to tell you, oh, you're right, you do have denial, maybe you don't have it, no, focus on the good things essentially of this. Focus on the things that affirm yourself and validate you, because you are valid no matter what your experience is. Because I think the episode that was just posted yesterday, you said if you've met one system, then you've met one system. That's it. Because every single one is different. And just that's my biggest reminder that helps me, is every system's experience is different.
Really well said. It makes me sad that to think that there are people out there that are, I'm going to say, harassing systems and suggesting they're not systems based on their perception of, or their perception of somebody else's trauma that they weren't present for. And they're also forgetting the attachment piece that is an enormous component in dissociation. If we didn't have secure attachments to help us kind of get through and process trauma when we were kids, the likelihood of dissociation is extremely high, regardless of whatever the trauma was. Also, can I just rant for a hot second about this concept of pain comparison? It drives me bananas when people do the whole,
God,
your
yes.
trauma is not that bad, that person's trauma was worse. Or you can get into situations where some people are literally like, oh yeah, that happened to you, well, listen to what happened to me, and they're trying to like one up somebody about the level of trauma or tragedy they've been through. And it's like, everybody's pain is a 10 on their personal scale. Can we just not?
Exactly. I definitely agree. I've seen that firsthand, where I've like, oh, dealt with this, or I had this issue, and they're like, oh, really? I had this, and that's nothing compared to me. I'm like, thank you for making it all about you once again. Great.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on doubt spirals, denial, etc., A? Or
Well, I mean, probably the reason I don't know very much about the system has to do with denial, but
There's that.
it's just conjecture at this point. But I will say that I feel like anytime we notice that we are pitted against one another, it always helps me to be like, okay, what's the structural drive that's causing us to do this to each other? Like, if everybody took all of our pain seriously, there wouldn't need to be a competition between us about whose pain is worse. Like, we wouldn't have to invalidate others to feel more valid. So I don't know if that helps, Pippin. I'm sorry that that's happening, because that really is so hurtful. But I truly believe, like, it's not about you, it's not about it's about them, but it's actually not even about them. It's like about the world we're living in, and how difficult it is for people to practice empathy and feel safe doing that for various reasons. So
as we were thinking about wrapping up, what are some, either you take your pick, either words of wisdom that you would like to share with other systems, or favorite resources that have been really helpful for you that you would like to let other people know exist out there?
Well, one, this podcast has definitely, I actually started at the very beginning, and then made my way through and listened to it. And Jamie, is it Matrix?
Marriage.
Marriage, her dissociation book, Dissociating Made Simple. I've not all the way through it yet, have not finished it, but so far it is absolutely great. I do love it. And I think here there's also been mention of a couple of multiples. I've listened to their podcasts. I do like their podcasts. And for those who are really looking to get to, I have DID. Why do I have DID? It's because I have, most of us see PTSD. What is that? That is trauma. How do I start healing that? So there's a podcast called Healing Trauma, um, that is by the Trauma Institute, who was actually ran by Frank Anderson, who worked with Bessel van der, I think, who Bessel van der Kolk, who did The Body Keeps the Score. Great author. Frank is a great guy. He worked at his practice at the Institute. And the Trauma Institute is Frank and Matthias, who is also another psychologist who works with CPTSD, with trauma, with complex trauma. And so if you're really looking to get to the healing, the root of it all, I think that's a really good podcast to take a look at. And you can find their social media, their information through that, I believe, as well.
We'll do a hunt and find links for folks in the show notes.
Okay, so yes to all of those. Absolutely, this podcast has been like life-changing, and I feel so grateful to be on it because it has been so instrumental in helping me find words for all of this that's happening. So thank you for creating this and making this space. I'm in a group with Adrian and Co. They are awesome. So they're a great resource. And they've been on this podcast too, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the writer who has really helped me through this the most is Annie Rogers. So Annie Rogers is a therapist and she's now a Lacanian analyst. And she wrote two amazing books. The first one is called A Shining Affliction, and the second one is called The Unsayable. And she doesn't use the label DID or OSDD or dissociative disorder when she's talking in those books, but the books are really relevant to those experiences. And I would highly recommend her writing. It's really amazing.
I remember reading A Shining Affliction in graduate school, and I completely forgot about that book. It's really good.
Yeah, it's funny because Pippin, as you were talking about Jamie's book, I was like, oh, I bought that, and then I hid it for myself, and I have no idea where it is. So clearly the parts are not ready for that book yet. So I guess I'll find it when they're ready.
Yes, hiding. I've dealt with that too. And it's really funny because they attempt to hide things, forgetting that a lot of times we are aware of what's going on. And so I think the little one, I think she's just hoping that we'll forget in time that we don't remember where she put something.
You have to love those parts, right? Where they're like, no, and you shall not be reading or doing that.
Yes, most definitely.
You could have told me before I bought the book so I didn't spend the money on it, but that's fine.
Yes. It is kind of expensive sometimes being a system between like getting things that you plan to do and then they go missing, or finding things that you've bought that you don't recall purchasing. Those two things can add up.
Oh yes, the Amazon purchases of I stay away from the toy aisle in Target because I know if I even glance in that direction, someone's going to go, "Oh, dolls." I have a Monster High doll. She has yet to play with. Sitting there, she is yet to play with. Doing like buying things, finding like when did I order this? Who ordered this? And then forgetting someone ordered it, or being in an area like, why am I here? Who brought me here? It's definitely system life.
Feeling super blessed for people like you all who are willing to come on and share your experiences and your time. And it feels like a blessing for us.
It's awesome.
And so truly, thank you all, more than both your entire systems. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing all that you've shared. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you. It was definitely a pleasure to come on. I was actually really excited when you extended that offer to be a guest. I was like, whoa, okay, I'm just me. We're just us. We're just little old us. Okay. And I
You're
jumped for joy and was freaking out at the same time. But it's great. It was great to come on and talk. And I hope I inspired some people, especially with the denial. I hope I helped.
no doubt there. You guys are awesome.
I hope I validated and affirmed some people's experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in and sharing your time with us. I did want to just circle back quickly to acknowledge that when we were talking about compensation, it morphed into a conversation about masking the dissociative identity's experiences, which is actually essentially a subtype of compensation. But we also know that some folks really want the terminology to be consistent. And so we just wanted to circle back and highlight that for all of you. We truly hope that you found today's episode valuable. And if you did, please consider sharing it with other systems and supports and professionals so that we can reach as many people as possible with important education and awareness. I mean, after all, we are all stronger together. So thank you again for being here. And until next time, let's keep healing. Thank you for tuning in. You can find our blog on Substack at healingmyparts.substack.com and on Instagram at healingmyparts. Just a disclaimer, any information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional therapy or behavioral health care, nor does listening to the podcast constitute a therapist-client relationship. Please be sure to take extra good care of you. And until next time, keep healing and thriving.